I'm also still the Zoom master today, so multitasking.
There
Laura, I
you
made
go.
you co-host just in case I miss someone who pops into the waiting room. Yesterday, we had a couple people like maybe lose connection and then kind of pop back in. So just keep an eye there.
Sure, I noticed. Thanks.
All right, thanks. All right, can everyone see that? Everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. I also can't see the chat, so a little verbal every once in a while is helpful. Okay, thanks everyone. Okay, so today I'm going to go through the packaging and aid notification process. I'm really going to keep this quite general because I know that there's a lot of specific things regarding packaging that are very, very institutional specific. So we might, well, hopefully we'll get through it a little faster than we have planned. The first couple of small pieces of advice that I want to give you as a new aid administrator regarding packaging is back to something Janet said yesterday that I did a couple years into financial aid. I did read the handbook. It took a long time, but I read it kind of chapter by chapter, piece by piece. Maybe maybe there's a couple chapters I didn't read all the way, but it was very, very helpful. And at the time, maybe there were things that didn't really feel like they mattered too much, but it is really helpful getting that vocabulary in your brain so that when you do start hearing different terminology and things, you go, oh, that sounds familiar. And you can go back and reference those chapters in the handbook that, you know, kind of help you have a better understanding of the whole picture. The other thing that I highly recommend you do is try to talk to your director or you know, your supervisor, maybe your supervisor is an associate director or an assistant director, about a little background knowledge on your school's methodology or technique or how the funding works, to get a little background information, especially if you just started working at a school and you've only been there a few months. You may have no idea how you know, scholarship funding works at your institution, how need-based aid funding is awarded. And it is very, very institutional specific. So if you can kind of have a casual conversation with someone in your office, that's really helpful. I have found that those conversations often happen on conferences and stuff because you don't have a lot of time to have nice long conversations with your director day to day. You just can never find the time. But let's say you end up going to PASFA conference next fall. Hopefully we'll see each other next fall face to face, but and you go with your director and you do that conference together and you're eating lunch and dinner together. Those are good times to say like, hey, can you give me a better explanation of how we give out need-based aid? Or can you tell me the background of this particular scholarship program and how it came to be? And they'll appreciate it because they'll appreciate that you're interested, but you'll appreciate the background information. So the more background information you have, the better for understanding all of this stuff. So today we're just going to go through what is packaging, the guidelines of how to put together a financial aid package. And then we're going to talk a little bit about over awards, how you deal with them, appeals, how you deal with them, and what is the proper way to notify your students of the financial aid package. So the other thing I want to say is we use this word package. I think that a lot of students, prospective students, kind of understand what package means, but a lot of schools use different terminology. Some schools may use financial aid offer, aid offer. We used to use the word award, but we're not really supposed to use financial aid award too often unless it's really truly free money, gift aid. But really NASFA doesn't want us to use the word award when we're talking about loans. So just packaging is the package is the whole package. It's like a big gift. And inside it is all of the things that are going to add up to create that financial aid award or offer. So you're going to hear lots of different words that mean the same thing. Okay, so when you are devising a packaging strategy for your institution, there's lots of different goals that you're trying to meet. You're trying to meet the financial need of your students who are potentially coming to your institution so that they come. You're trying to make sure that with the resources that you have available to give out, that you are being as equitable and fair as possible with those funds. You are obviously trying to make sure that you are staying in compliance with all of your rules and regulations that you need to follow as a financial aid administrator. And then you're also trying to meet, goals and objectives of the actual institution, or maybe of programs within your institution. So packaging is this kind of really complicated, lots of data points, lots of different things go into figuring out how are you going to give out this money to students who are potentially going to come enroll in your institution and then continue to be enrolled in your institution. So you have to also think about all your returning students when you are creating your packaging strategy. So some big things that you are going that matter a lot when you are coming up with your packaging strategy are, what are all of the different types of financial aid that your institution is going to package for students? So are you packaging merit-based aid? So like, academic scholarships, when are those offered? Are those offered up front to the student when they're first admitted to the institution? That's typical. Who decides who gets those awards, how much they are, and how does the student accept them or decide that they're going to, say that they are going to take those funds? Are they going to accept them before they get their financial aid package with their other financial aid, or are they going to get their whole entire financial aid package first before they determine whether or not they're going to enroll at your institution and pay their deposit? And then your institution may also be giving out need-based aid from the actual institution. So that may be an algorithm that your institution develops internally, or maybe you use a consultant to help you figure out what type of algorithm you're going to use to figure out how to give out that institutional need-based aid appropriately and not go over budget. You're also thinking about things like your institution's net tuition revenue. So you're thinking about how much aid can our institution give out and still have enough students come and attend our institution that pay tuition? And are we going to collect enough revenue to meet all of our institutional financial goals for the year? And that also leads into retention. How are we going to afford to continue to give out this aid year after year, so that these students remain enrolled and they are happy with the financial aid package that they get as a sophomore, junior, senior student, and all of that stuff. So also you're thinking about, does your institution just use the EFC from the FAFSA, or is your institution calculating an institutional EFC? So maybe in the chat, if you could, if you know, and you may not know, but you probably do at this point, in the chat put, does your school use an institutional EFC in addition to the FAFSA, or do they just use the federal EFC that the FAFSA calculates? And Laura, maybe you can give me a.
Yep. It's like just a federal EFC, both federal, FAFSA only, federal.
Great. For those schools that are using federal only, are you using the federal EFC to give out institutional need-based aid, or do you not give out any institutional need-based aid? Maybe if there's one or two who understand that concept, that would be just helpful to.
No answer. Oh, use it to give out institutional need-based aid.
Great.
Yes.
Okay.
institutional. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'm going to give you all just a slight background on my personal experience with packaging. At my current institution, I am in charge of packaging, but I work at a primarily, well, we're only grad professional. So my perspective is a little bit different when it comes to some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. I'm giving you a heads up that I'm not necessarily 100% familiar with all of these topics because I work at a grad professional school. So the way that we do our packaging at PCOM is we actually don't package students until they're confirmed, which is really weird. When I first started working here, I was really confused because the institution I worked at before, I worked at Arcadia University. So we were obviously packaging students as they were being admitted to the institution, as they were being accepted to the institution, and then awarding their financial aid and giving them a financial aid offer. And then they were understanding and seeing that information before they were deciding if they were making their deposit. What we do at PCOM is we do award merit-based aid up front when the student is accepted. But we do not do any packaging until the student is what we call confirmed, which is basically they've made their tuition deposit and we know that they're going to be coming to the institution. That's when we actually match that FAFSA record into our system and create a financial aid package for the student. And the reason why we do that in grad professional is mostly because mostly all we're packaging, the majority of what we're packaging is loans. So it really doesn't make much sense to package a student with loans and offer them loans when they know they're going to be eligible for the loans. So that's just the way that we do it. We do have grad students who get confused about that because they think that they're going to get that financial aid package ahead of time, but just a little background information. Okay. The fundamentals of creating a financial aid package are right here on the screen. This is the best little graphic. So yesterday we talked very briefly, Janet talked about how do you determine what is your financial need of your student? It's just your cost of attendance minus the EFC. Now, if you're using that federal EFC from the FAFSA, there you go. You're going to have financial need, and that's going to be your federal financial need. That's all financial need if you're only using the FAFSA EFC. But you may work at an institution that uses the FAFSA and an institutional methodology for calculating EFC. Maybe you use the CSS profile. Maybe you use the FAFSA and a supplementary financial aid application that is institutional, and then you're calculating an institutional EFC. PCOM, we actually calculate an institutional EFC that is different than the federal EFC, but we don't have a supplementary application. We just have a different algorithm for our institutional EFC compared to the federal methodology EFC. So the FAFSA is going to tell us the federal methodology EFC, but then we actually internally in our banner system, we calculate a different EFC using a different algorithm in our banner system that we have set up that looks at other criteria. So you may have 2 EFCs at your institution. You may just have one. So you'll have your cost of attendance minus whichever EFC you're using to determine financial need for whatever type of aid that you are packaging. If you're packaging federal aid, you're going to be using the federal methodology EFC to get to that financial need figure. Okay, I'm going to say that again because it's confusing and it confused me when I first started working in aid. When you're packaging federal funds, so your Stafford loan, your Pell Grant, I will talk about some other federal funds on Friday as well when I talk about direct loans, and later today in this presentation. But if you're packaging federal funds, you're going to use the federal EFC, the one directly from the FAFSA. If you're packaging institutional funds, then you can use your institutional EFC. And that's the purpose of having an institutional EFC, because as an institution, you're in charge of how you give out your institutional need-based aid. So you're going to use your institutional EFC if you have one, or you'll use the federal EFC if you don't do an institutional. So your cost of attendance minus your EFC is your initial, what we call initial financial need. And then the student would be awarded financial aid, whatever they're eligible for, and then they're going to have remaining need. So the remaining need is what the student is going to use supplementary financial aid to cover, or to maybe pay out of pocket. Supplementary financial aid would be something like a private student loan, maybe a Parent Plus loan, Graduate Plus loan. If they are a graduate level student, that's what they would be using to cover their remaining need. Okay. And cost of attendance minus the aid that's been offered so far is remaining eligibility. So we'll get to that in a minute. That's a little confusing at that point. Okay, so typically an institution is constantly kind of reviewing their packaging policies and procedures, but really you need to do it annually. You should have a procedure in place to review your procedures and your policies. The way that we do it at our institution is we actually have a person in charge of policies and procedures. We have like someone who kind of specializes in all of our communication stuff from our financial aid office. And he is in charge of our calendar, of our communications calendar. And one of the things that's on that calendar is to review the P&P manual every year. And he kind of keeps on top of us too, which is really helpful, because the way that we're structured at PCOM is we have associate directors under a chief financial aid officer, and each associate is in charge of different components of the aid process at our institution. So we're in charge of making sure those policies and procedures related to the things that we are in charge of, we are in charge of making sure that they're always up to date and accurate. We keep our policies and procedures on our shared drive. We have a series of folders, and we keep the policies in one place and we keep the procedures in another place. Procedures are literally procedures. That's the way we do it at PCOM. So they are literally the step-by-step operation of a way to do a particular task. So if you don't know yet where your institutions, your financial aid offices, policies and procedures are, you should find them. Ask your director, where are our policies and procedures? Because that's a really important thing to review if you're a brand new aid officer. And then if you find things that are out of date, you may then offer to help updating them. So you must have up-to-date policies and procedures all the time. And it's really important to make sure that your packaging policies and procedures are reviewed annually and updated, and that they're always accurate. So if you are audited or someone has a question about why did a student get this particular, why did a student get this award and this other student didn't get this award, they look similar, you have to be able to explain why a student got packaged a certain way and another student didn't get packaged a certain way. You have to be consistent with your rules. You obviously have to be in compliance and all that stuff. NASFA also has a P&P builder, which we used for a year or two, but we found that it wasn't super useful for grad professional school. There was a lot of stuff in it that wasn't applicable, so we stopped using it. But I would say it's very comprehensive. So that's a great place to start. If your institution doesn't have a policy and procedure, then that's a good place to start. All right. Whew. So there's a lot of information. I'm trying to be thorough, but not too thorough, I guess. All right. So when you are packaging campus-based aid, this is a rule that you have to follow from the program participation agreement. When you as a Title IV institution agree to participate in these programs, campus-based aid is, I think Janet touched on it a little yesterday. We're talking about federal work study, SEOG, used to be Perkins. What else? I guess that's all the campus-based aid at this point. Yeah, okay. Melissa's shaking her head. So when you're giving out campus-based aid, you do have to kind of be a little bit particular about how you give out the funds, and you have to be able to explain just how are you packaging those funds equitably. And really a good way to do it is that first come, first served way, and establishing a priority deadline for your students that you clearly communicate to them. You can make that priority deadline align with like your state deadline. That's a good idea. Or maybe it needs to be a little sooner depending on how much campus-based aid you have. The only campus-based aid we give out at PCOM is work study. We do federal work study. And basically what we do is we give out work study to any student who wants work study. We're lucky enough that we have enough funding for a student to cover all students who are interested in participating. And that's just because not all of our students want to participate in work study. So we give it out if a student requests it and they're eligible. And we also always give it out to returning work study students. So if someone did work study in the prior academic year and they worked and earned, I think we do like $100. If they worked and they earned $100, then they are going to automatically have work study in their financial aid package for the next academic year. And then we also have certain students that we never award work study to. We don't ever award work study to our third and fourth year medical students who are on clerkships because they're not on campus. So that's reasonable. That would be reasonably, we would be making that reasonably available to those students because we don't think it's reasonable that a student would do work study if they were on rotations. So basically you are coming up with your own definition of reasonably available, but you just need to be able to explain what that means. If an auditor happened to ask you, how are you reasonably giving out these funds that are campus-based aid? Because campus-based aid is given to the institution, and then the institution decides how to give out those funds to students.
For most of the group that are attending that don't have graduate programs, that are dealing with undergraduate programs, you're looking at things like you can't exclude part-time students. You even have to give to less than half-time students. So yeah, as Grace mentioned, they're able to exclude based on really good reason for their medical students, but a lot of campuses, and I didn't share this, but I'll mention it. I do, I'm a NASFA reviewer for Standards of Excellence, which means I go to different schools and we do review, like a pre-review of what would be an audit, a federal audit. And speaking of which, next week I'm going to actually be doing one in Tennessee. So at that point, that's what we find. A lot of schools, you know, don't give to part-time and less than half-time. So that's one big one. But you know, there's other things. For the most part, you can't exclude any majors and things like that. So in Grace's circumstance, they were able to substantiate excluding that one group, but for most schools, it does have to go far and wide with that spread. So just a little note there.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, I don't always think of all of these things. All right. I want to touch just very quickly on scholarship funds. And I know every institution is going to be packaging scholarships differently. So you may be at a school where, you know, the admissions office is purely in charge of determining the scholarship grid, how students are given merit-based aid, incoming students. It may be handled by the admissions office and the financial aid office jointly together. And most of the time, there's institutional scholarships sources are managed in different ways. So at my institution, we do a combination of 3 different ways of giving out institutional funding. We allocate a certain amount that goes to our admissions office, and they have a budget of scholarship that they are permitted to give out each academic year to incoming students. Some of those scholarship funds are going to be renewable, which means they're going to get packaged for that student year after year after year. until they graduate. And some of them are going to be one-time only scholarship awards that are maybe that student only gets that scholarship during their first year of the program. So we give that budget, but we, the financial aid office, we are in charge of the scholarship budgets at our institution, because the way that we are structured is we fall under the finance division. So different schools are structured different ways, but we are structured that I report to the CFO. So I report up in the CFO direction. That's how it works at my school. You may be reporting to, a vice president of enrollment management or a chief enrollment management officer, something like that, up the chain into the cabinet to your president's office. But we report through the finance division. So it works a little different with us, but basically we're in charge of the scholarship, handling the scholarship budgets at our institution. So I'm in charge of handling the scholarship budget. So it's a little stressful, but basically annually I give a budget to our admissions office. They use that money however they wish, according to, what their admissions goals are for the cycle. And then we have an amount of funding that we use for need-based aid. So when we package in using our algorithm within our system, we are packaging need-based aid to students that we have determined are goals that we are trying to meet as a financial aid office. And then we have another set of scholarship funding that comes from our advancement division, which are all of our endowment scholarship funding sources from donors to the institution. And those are given out through a scholarship committee where students apply for the scholarships internally, an internal application that's in addition to the FAFSA, a supplementary application, and they then get reviewed and matched with those endowment scholarship funds by our scholarship committee, which we head from the financial aid office, but we do it jointly with our advancement division. So every school is going to be doing this differently, and your budgets are going to be handled differently depending on how your institution does it as well. Our institution, we do not do any over awarding when we award scholarship funding. When we're awarding scholarship funding, it's money from an account. It's a dollar. It's a real dollar. So, but other institutions may award admission scholarships, particularly admission scholarships, differently. They may over award, meaning they may overextend the total amount of scholarships that are being offered out because they have an understanding of how many students that are actually going to be attending the institution and will actually be accepting those scholarship funds. And therefore, what that actual end cost is going to be is within budget. But at the point in which all the scholarships are being out in the world offered to accepted students, if they all accepted the scholarship, maybe the institution maybe wouldn't actually have enough money to fund all of those scholarship funds or enough seats in the class to seat all those students. So it just depends on your institution and how they're doing things. I don't currently work at an institution that works that way, but you probably do. So just have an idea of merit-based aid can be given out in all different ways. And then typically that's happening first, especially in a traditional undergrad situation. And it may be happening way before that student has even done a FAFSA or there's any financial need information that the institution can use. So when that package is then created, that merit-based aid will already be on the package. Do you have something to say, Melissa? Oh, no. Okay. All right. So when you are developing a packaging strategy for your institution, there are different categories and things that you can use in order to figure out how are you going to give out these institutional funds? How are you going to give out federal aid? So this is really about institutional funds that I'm talking about for this particular slide, because you're in charge of the institutional funds and what goals you're trying to meet with that money. Your institution may be changing goals all the time. That's not super helpful when you're packaging, but that does happen. So pretty much annually, we have discussions with our admissions office about what goals are they trying to meet They may be just trying to meet the goal of getting enough students in the class so that they can run the program. Maybe the goal is that they're looking to grow a particular major or an academic program. And if they're trying to grow a particular major, then maybe in the packaging algorithm, we want to weigh that student's eligibility for institutional aid a little bit heavier than a student in a different academic program who maybe we already know we are going to fill that program very easily. Residency status. So maybe you are giving priority to students who are living on campus. Maybe you're giving priority to students who live in the state or maybe live in a surrounding state. I know that at our institution, about 90% of our students are from the state of Pennsylvania. That's something that we want. That's how our institution works, and that's part of our accreditation as a DO school, is we really are supposed to have a certain percentage of students from the state of Pennsylvania enrolled in our school at all times. So we prioritize Pennsylvania students when giving out need-based aid, when giving out merit aid as well. Maybe you're looking at class standing, test scores, you're looking at their GPA. You may be looking at their current GPA if it's a returning student. So let's say you have students who are packaged and they're returning for their second year. Maybe you only give out that need-based institutional aid to students who have met a certain GPA requirement. You're allowed to do whatever you want with your institutional need-based aid. Obviously, you can set a priority application date or a hard deadline application date for institutional need-based aid, and you can also use enrollment status. When it comes to institutional aid, you don't need to follow the same rules as federal aid. You can follow different rules if you wish. So I will say we use institutional need-based aid quite a bit for students who are not eligible for federal aid. So we try to kind of supplement students who maybe they have been denied a Graduate Plus loan application and they have not been able to secure an endorser for their Graduate Plus loan. And they are short a few $1,000s in addition to what they're getting from their Stafford loan. A lot of the times we will really, really try to supplement that remaining cost for the student with institutional need-based aid if they qualify for need. So we may make them more qualified because they're having that credit issue with the Graduate Plus loan. So that's one example of how your institution could make a different decision. Okay, great. So when you are packaging, you're trying to meet certain goals. So in the chat, can you share some packaging strategies or goals that your particular institution, other than just enrolling students, right? That's obviously everybody's goal is, hey, we have a certain number of students that we really need to get enrolled this year in order to meet our financial goals for our institution. Let's say we're trying to get a class of 500. That's goal number one. But in addition to that goal, is anybody aware of additional institutional goals that your particular school may be trying to meet? You can put those in the chat. And Laura, you can let me know if anybody's saying anything.
I'll let you know.
Thanks.
Nothing yet. They're
Nothing yet.
thinking.
So I mean, one of the goals I'll share for
Students with the
us.
most need. Sorry, Grace.
Go ahead, say it.
Students with the most need.
Students with the most need.
Mhm.
Okay, so the goal would be to reduce debt. So for us, when we give out need-based aid, basically what we say our goal is to reduce our indebtedness, our average indebtedness of our students, so that when we report those indebtedness figures up to our accrediting body for our medical school, we want students who are looking at our school potentially to come and attend PCOM to go, oh, look, PCOM's average student indebtedness is less than other schools. That means that they're more generous with need-based aid. Maybe their costs are a little less to attend that institution. They get more financial support. Maybe I want to go there. So that's one of our goals that we are trying to meet, is having students with less total debt. Is there anything else in there, Laura?
Getting packaging 100% correct the first time around.
Yeah, that's hard.
That's hard.
Yeah,
A good goal.
good goal for sure. That's for sure. And I don't even know what that means, to be honest with you. Like, yeah, I mean, you can't, I can't even imagine, meeting all your goals, right? That would be meeting every single institutional goal you have in the first round of packaging, which would be a miracle. So, I mean, another institutional goal that we're particularly working on right now is diversity. And I'm sure a lot of schools are working on that too, where we are trying to grow the percentage of students, of minority students in certain programs, identifying programmatically who are the minority students in those specific programs and grow those minorities. So we have specifically allocated scholarship funding for that purpose, need-based funding for that purpose. So your institution may be doing different things, but the big things, of course, are obviously you want your students to come, enroll, be successful, and stay until graduation, right? So those are your packaging goals for every single college in the country. Your goal is, we want students to come, we want them to be happy here, we want them to be successful, and we want them to graduate. So those are everyone's packaging goals, no matter the student. All right. So when you are doing your financial aid packaging, so I mean, most schools, your system, whatever system that you use, you may be using Banner, you may be using Power Fades, Genzabar, there's a million different systems. You may have something homegrown. Your system setup is where basically the the bones, of your packaging live. So like the actual gears that run the packaging process, you're setting all that up in your system. And then annually you are reviewing that setup and making sure that it's set up properly for the packaging strategy that you are taking in that particular year. So it's up to the school how you award aid and in which order you award aid when you are building the package. If you kind of think about it like a set of blocks and you're building those blocks, you may put, scholarships first, and then you may put grants, and then you may put work study, and then you may put loans. Maybe you put grants first, and then work study, and then scholarships, and then loans. It just depends on the institution and how you are divvying out those funds. You may set up your system internally in a way that the funds themselves get given out in different order. So the process of setting it up is kind of where, once you figure out how you want to do it, then you set your system up to do it that way. So every school can do it differently. The sequence does affect the outcome. But yeah, and then really, once you have that sequence though, you need to be packaging everybody in that same sequence. So in this particular example, this school is packaging with need-based aid, grants, then federal work study, and then loans. That's pretty good. And the assumption here may also be that that merit-based scholarship is already applied. So maybe the merit-based scholarship is already on the account or already on the package, counting as estimated financial assistance. Then you've got, what do you have left over to give your grants, your work study, and your loans? Okay, you can package differently for different programs. Like, for example, at our institution, we give need-based aid to our medical students. We give need-based aid to some of our other professional programs, but we don't give need-based aid at all to some of our graduate programs, like our part-time grad programs. We don't give any need-based aid to those programs. So those students are only getting packaged with loans and work study. They are not getting anything from our need-based pot of money. And that's fine. So it's our decision on whether we need to give need-based aid to those students or not. And it's not necessarily meeting any institutional goals, though we'd love to give need-based aid to everybody. If it's not meeting an institutional goal to give aid to a particular group of students, then that's fine. You use your institutional aid how you wish. Okay. Yeah. Specify minimum amounts. Yeah, you may have minimum amounts for your campus-based aid. You should have a minimum amount. Probably you're probably walking into lots of historical knowledge at your institution. You're not necessarily a brand new aid director setting things up for the very first time at your school. I actually have a colleague right now who is a brand new aid director establishing Title IV at an institution right now. So she is in the situation where she is just creating and deciding what things are going to be like at this institution, at a new medical school that they've just opened. But if you're walking into a school that's existed for 100 years and has been given out financial aid since the 1960s, then you probably have a lot of institutional historical knowledge to lean on, to look at, to have a good understanding of how many students attend your school, what do they look like financially, how should we be giving out this money, lots and lots of data to work with. So you should be able to understand, what the minimum should be for work study, what the minimum should be for SEOG, because you already know how many students you have and in general, what they're going to look like financially. Okay. We're going to talk a ton more about aid years, award years, the types of terms that you can have loans over. So I'm just going to very briefly show you this slide, but know that we are going to come back to this in a couple days and talk about the different types of terms and award years that you can be establishing at your school. But it's important to have just a vague understanding right now, because when you package, you're packaging for the award year. So the award year is like up to a 12-month period. It's going to start generally in July, around July, maybe a little after, and it's going to go for a 12-month period. And then the point in which an award year ends and another award year begins, that's called your summer crossover period. So your school may decide to take that period of time that overlaps. Right now we're in that period. So you guys are all familiar because you're probably dealing with it right now, especially if you're giving out PLUS loans or Stafford loans in your summer term. You are dealing with this crossover idea right now. You may be a school who has decided that summer aid is a header, or maybe your school has decided summer aid is a trailer, or maybe your school has decided it depends on the student. We could make it a header for this student, we can make it a trailer for that student. And what that means is the summer period, if it overlaps the award year dates, the start and end dates of the academic year, then you may be able to lump that summer term onto the beginning as the beginning of the year, and that's going to start your new academic year, and summer will be the beginning. Or maybe you are going to tack that summer on to the end of an academic year. And it's really important to know what you're doing when you are creating those loans or maybe work study, because it then vastly affects how much you can give the student, depending on how much more they're eligible for that annual amount for that year. And your year can't be more than 12 months. So a mistake that gets made sometimes at schools that are flexible with the header trailer thing is you may have given a student summer as a header and then forgotten and given them summer as a trailer in the same award year, and you can't do that. So the award year can't be more than 12 months. So you would then have to make sure that if that student wanted summer aid again, their second year of enrollment, that you are making summer a header again, and you are making sure that they've applied for aid for that upcoming academic year. I've worked at the 2 institutions that I've been at have done it 2 different ways. We do a standard summer header. We only process summer as a header. And that works for us. We have figured out that it makes sense to do it that way. And that's just the way we always do it. The only time when it's frustrating is if you have a student who's graduating in the summer at the end of the summer term, which happens in a couple of our programs, and they do have to file a FAFSA again. So that gets them annoyed and a little frustrated. Sometimes they forget that they need to file another FAFSA for their 3rd year, which is really only 1 semester. But it works for us. What's good about filing a FAFSA for that 3rd year is they have a whole nother year of eligibility when they unlock that FAFSA for the new academic year. So then we can give them a whole annual amount of aid again, because their new academic year has started. That's all I'm going to say about summer right now, because we're going to talk a lot more about summer on Friday. All right. Okay, so you could also have criteria that's program specific when you are packaging. So that just means that like the different types of aid that you can put on a student's financial aid package, they have different criteria for packaging. So for example, you're not going to package a teach grant for a student who's not in an education program. You're not going to package AmeriCorps benefits for a student who's not receiving AmeriCorps benefits. So I don't know if I would ever package, we don't package AmeriCorps benefits, we put them on later. So I don't know why you package AmeriCorps benefits, but anyway, you're just not going to package things for students who aren't eligible or would not be eligible for those particular things. That's really all that means. Okay. If you are packaging direct loans, then you need to add the loan fees to your cost of attendance. So there's 2 different ways that schools can go about doing this. You can have a standard, which is like an average loan fee that's just generally built into your cost of attendance, no matter what. So that's one way you can do it. So you can say, for instance, I mean, you know what freshmen are going to get, what first year students are going to get from the Stafford loan. You can predict exactly what that loan fee is going to be if they take all $5,500 of that loan. So you could just put that amount on all freshmen or all first year students' cost of attendance. You can put that in their budget automatically. Cost of attendance is also called budget. You guys probably all have heard that before, but in case you haven't, we kind of use those 2 words interchangeably at our institution. So the cost of attendance is also the student's budget for their program for the year. So you may just automatically consider that part of like the standard cost of attendance for the program. That's fine. Or you may package, when you package the loan, you may then add the actual loan fees to the cost of attendance at that time. We do this in both ways. So we do a combination of the 2. We do the direct loan fee for the Stafford loan is included in all students' cost of attendance. So it's a standard amount, and it's based on what the annual limit for direct loan for that particular program is, depending on the program for that program's cost of attendance. But then when graduate students request the Graduate Plus loan, we then have a process in place within our system where when a student requests the Plus loan application comes into our system, and it then, when we run our loan process, we add a standard, it's an average. So we add an average plus loan fee to the cost of attendance, and then we create the plus loan. So if the student requested a plus loan for maximum, then we basically prompt our system to create the fee, add the fee to the cost of attendance, and then we originate the loan for the total now leftover unmet need that now includes the fee that we've just added to the cost of attendance. So when we create the loan, there's now 0 unmet need left because we've created the loan for maximum, which is the amount the student requested, which is the loan plus the fee. So that's how we do it. So you can do it multiple ways. Let's see. For non-federal loan borrowers, so if you have private student loan borrowers, you can add loan fees, but typically private student loans do not have loan fees.
Do you mind if I
Yeah,
jump in for just a quick second?
sure.
I think that you're doing a great job with giving this information. I just want to remind everybody, you know, for Grace's perspective, she works at a grad school. I know probably most of you don't, but even when she's saying the grad students, it applies equally for the undergrad as well as the grad. So don't get looped around when she mentions grad, if you don't have any grad programs, because the loans are treated the same. There's different limits and, you know, there's different things of that nature, but, you know, she has to do from her perspective, you know, with her examples. But I just know that sometimes when if you're not used to grad and you hear grad, you get a little bit, uh-oh, is this going to be, but it's exactly the same. So just use, even though they're not interchangeable for the purposes of our lesson, when she says grad, you can hear undergrad and you'll be fine.
Yeah,
Okay,
they
because I
just
didn't know
have
if
more loans.
yeah, they just get more loans. That's the only
Way
difference.
more.
Yeah, yep. So
Yeah.
just to everybody, when you're listening, just don't get looped around the grad part. That it's totally irrelevant in terms of the rules. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, sorry. I've been in grad for like 7 years, so, and I haven't been with undergrads for quite a while. So it is all the same though. That is true. So, all right, for teach grants, I'm just skipping ahead on my notes. So teach grants, you can package. The teach grant annual limit right now is just adjusted slightly because of the sequestration. So it's normally 4,000. I think it's about 3,700 right now. You can package that teach grant. Maybe Melissa, you can give a little insight on, I mean, I can explain this, but you might be better at explaining what does it mean to replace the EFC with the teach grant funds?
Well, here, let's do one step even better. How many people even deal with teach grant?
That's a good start.
One, is that it? Because like teach is a really great program for the right student. But like when teach first came out, the Department of Ed called it a groan, which means a grant that turns into a loan. And, you know, when it comes out with that, it kind of made me lose interest. So for me, I chose not to do teach grants for my students. Now, I think it's a great program for like a graduate program, but how many, and you'll touch on this, I'm sure. How many 18-year-olds do you know that really know what they want to be in the long run? Do you know what I mean? So, you know, if they don't stay in the teach program, if they go out of it, all those grants, they get turned to a loan. So we probably won't spend a whole lot of time on this program. If we have one person, Katrina, if you have questions, feel free to let me know. But when we talk about replacing the EFC, it's kind of the same thing with the unsub. It's just not affected. It doesn't fall into that need. You can go all the way up to cost of attendance is the bottom line with whatever's left.
Got it.
So, yep, good question. Good question. But
thank you.
I think most people aren't going to be doing teach. If you do, and you don't, if there's not an understanding or something, let me know. For you, those of you that don't do it, just be thankful.
We did it. I definitely did teach when I worked at Arcadia. We did teach grants. So
yeah, I mean, like I said, for the right person, it's great, but for the wrong person, it's a bummer because it converts to an unsub loan and interest accrues all the way back to when you took it out as a grant. Yeah. Now, if that's not a drag, I don't know what is.
We actually teach for a short period of time, and we actually left the program One of the other things we found is when we polled the students, when you go in to teach, you have to be very specific and meet all those criteria into the loan. But also what we found was the students who start this have to start into lower, the school district that has disadvantaged students, right? So what they do is they start out as a lower base salary. And then what that does is when a student's looking to get tenure, they have basically have to stay in that program or that school district. And then it also affects their retirement. So students were thinking out that maybe this isn't for us. So you're right, as a typical 18-year-old, Melissa, they weren't knowing what they were getting into. As the students were getting older, they were doing oh, maybe I want to get into a higher paying school district so I can retire earlier.
Right.
Mhm.
So like I say, from my perspective, I don't know if I'm mute. No, from my perspective, it's great for the right student or for grad students that are a little more sure of what they're doing and things of that nature. But yeah, for the undergrad, it'll help you pay your bill, but then you don't know if you're going to be paying a loan back at the end of the story, which is, a bummer.
Yeah, I think maybe the only time it would be a smart move is if it was going to be private loan anyway.
Right.
If you were going to then need that 4,000 from taking a private loan, then maybe you're not that worried about taking the risk of it becoming an unsubsidized loan, because if it was going to be loan anyway,
gonna
then
be
I
a
think
loan
that's the
anyway.
situation a lot of our students were in at Arcadia, was they were going to be taking private loan anyway, and they were potentially going to be following this path. So, hey, might as well take it. And eventually, if it turns into a Stafford loan, that's okay. So if that's your perspective, that's fine. Okay.
There's a good question on this.
Yeah.
So it says, when the teach grant converts to an unsub loan, does the lifetime eligibility for the unsub loan decrease?
If it goes towards your aggregate max,
Yeah.
so it
So
is
yes.
counted.
Does that answer your question, Jasper? Yes.
Yeah, so and we haven't even gotten to this part yet because we'll hit that towards the end of the week when we do direct loans, but each student has aggregate loan limits based on their career and on their level. And and a lot of times in these instances, it happens after the fact. So it's really not going to affect the student so much while they're in school, but it could, and
Mhm.
it could put them over the limit if they decided to go on. They changed their mind and then they decided. So I'm an undergrad, I take all this teach. I later decided to go for my MBA. Let's not, because the loan levels go up again. So I'm doing teach. I do all this stuff. I decide teaching's not for me. I stop school. My teach grants turn into loans. 2 years later, I decide to go back to school. I have less loan limit available for a different major.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. On Friday, when I talk about the direct loan limits, I will give some examples, but we definitely have loan limit issues in medical school and our doctoral programs. Even though the limits are so large, we do often have students who have reached those aggregate limits. But anyway, and yes, it would count as part of that. Once it's converted to loan, then yes, of course, it's going to be counted in that aggregate total amount of loans that you have. So packaging IASG, this is something we said yesterday. Most folks aren't seeing this. It's very rare. So this is really I'm not going to talk too much about it, but this is for students who lost a parent in military service after 9/11 in Iraq or Afghanistan. And then this is basically what it does is it's just Pell Grant. So it's not called IASG when it's on your financial aid package. It just makes the student eligible for Pell, and then it's going to be packaged as Pell. So that's something that's a little confusing about it. So it's called something, but it's not really, it's really just the eligibility requirement for Pell, for more Pell for students who wouldn't have been eligible for Pell. And then the Children of Fallen Heroes works the same way, which is also really rare, but it's also packaged as Pell. And basically the student's going to get Pell Grant if they weren't eligible for Pell Grant, if they meet these other criteria. And this criteria comes in on the FAFSA. So you should have your system set up to identify those particular students when they file their FAFSA. Okay. So let's talk about over awards a little bit. So over awards is when your student's financial aid is exceeding their cost of attendance. Now this can happen for a couple of reasons. It typically doesn't happen when you package the student because most of your systems are going to be set up to package the cost of attendance. So you're not going to package student over their unmet need. You're not going to over award them up front. But what may happen is something may change on their FAFSA, a legitimate change. I think Melissa gave a really good example yesterday that maybe, or maybe it was Janet, I don't remember who gave the example, but maybe a student has a sibling who is intending on being in school, being in college in that upcoming academic year, but then that sibling decided not to go to college. So then the parent went onto the FAFSA and changed the number of students in college from 2 to 1, which then made the EFC larger, and therefore maybe creates an over award on their financial aid package that student may have already received. And that just means that now this student is probably not eligible for some of these pieces of aid that we have packaged them for. Another thing that may cause an over award is an adjustment to the cost of attendance. So remember, there's the two factors. Well, there's three factors really when it comes to over awards. It's your cost of attendance, your EFC, and then your financial aid that you've been packaged with, your EFA. So if any of those figures changes, that could result in an over award. So maybe you have an adjustment to your COA where the student was going to be doing an overload and they were going to be taking 20 credits, maybe not 20 credits. They were going to be taking 18 credits a semester and they were going to be paying an overload fee of an extra $3,000 a semester to do those extra credits. But they decided that's going to be too much. I'm only going to take 12 credits. I'm not going to be overloaded. And now I don't have to pay that extra money. But now my cost of attendance just decreased by that $3,000. And if I was packaged all the way up to my cost of attendance, now I'm over awarded. So I know that different schools are going to handle over awards differently, but typically what we adjust first is loans. So we would want to adjust. So with an over award situation, we would want to first reduce loans as much as possible, of course. And then we would go down the line and reduce things more and more as we had to. If we were reducing loans and the student had multiple types of loans, then we would want to be reducing, like, let's say a student had Stafford loan and a Parent Plus loan. You would probably reduce the Parent Plus loan first before reducing the Stafford loan. I think we would reduce the Grad Plus loan before reducing the Stafford loan always. On Friday, when we talk about direct loans, we'll talk about specific rules that are in place about those loan programs and the order in which they need to be adjusted.
Just as a contrast, what we normally do is if a student has work study and they're not using it, we'll cancel the work study because then no action needs to be taken. We're not taking a loan back from a student. But if they're working, then we would go to the plus and then, the direct loan. And, depending on the student, we may reach out to say, what do you want to do here?
Yeah.
Just, your students best. So that when sometimes, if you have a whole stack of them, you're just trying to get through them, you're going to just do what you got to do. Other times you might say, oh, there's Jimmy, better touch base with his mom. They'll be calling here in 2.3 seconds. You know what I mean? So you kind of know your population and, deal accordingly, I think they're right.
Yeah. Also, it also depends on how you budget your students. So you may do like annual budgeting where they have a budget for the whole award year. And you could just reduce an upcoming disbursement to accommodate for that over award. Or if you do period-based budgeting, which is what we do. So we do period-based budgeting. So basically that means every loan period every payment period of the loan is its own budget. So sounds like a headache, but that's what we do. So every payment period is its own budget. So we actually we review for over awards all the time. So we are always checking to see if a student has been over awarded in even a particular term within their annual budget, within their annual cost of attendance. And that's just how we do it. So if a student, let's say, is over awarded only in their fall term, we would adjust their fall term aid to accommodate that over award. Yeah. So you may not need to do that though. So you, depending on how your school does budgeting and how you set your cost of attendance, you may be able to like look into the spring term and say, oh, this student's over awarded by $1,000 in the fall. I'm just going to reduce their spring aid that has yet to disperse by $1,000 to accommodate that over award. And then just inform the student that, hey, you're going to have $1,000 less coming in the spring. That's because this happened in the fall. That could work for your student. Like Melissa said, if you have time, the best thing to do is get in touch with the student and figure out what's going to work for them best to cause the least amount of disruption to their finances for the semester. Okay, Pell Grants are never adjusted regarding over awards, and remember that IASG and the CFHS, that's really like a Pell Grant, so that's only adjusted if it exceeds the cost of attendance, and that's all they're getting. And the campus-based programs do allow a tolerance of $300. So yeah, so you can have a tolerance of up to $300 for campus-based programs after you adjust loans. And of course you can, like Melissa suggested, you can reduce unearned work study dollars, which is a really convenient way of fixing an over award, especially if it's small, because the student probably won't even notice that you've reduced their work study by a small amount. You should still tell them though. You should always tell students when you're adjusting their package. Go ahead, Laura.
We just have a question in the
Sure.
chat. It's a good one. Did your institution run into this with COVID? If your institution reduced tuition costs for remote learning, if so, how did you handle?
So my particular institution did not reduce any costs. The only thing that we did was we did not charge our comprehensive fee. We did not adjust our cost of attendance when COVID was really particular. So I would not give anyone advice it probably was a difficult year to start financial aid because we were breaking a lot of rules this year, because we were given a lot of flexibilities and a lot of things that we could do that we typically wouldn't be able to do, because I think the Department of Ed was trying to have a least impact on students as possible. But when it came to financial aid, but normally if we reduce cost, direct cost to the student, then we reflect that in our cost of attendance immediately. You don't have to do that though. So you don't have to adjust your cost of attendance constantly as an institution. Really, once you've set your cost of attendance and you've created loans, you don't have to go in and fix the cost of attendance when the cost of attendance changes. But if you do period-based budgeting, you do. So depending on your school and what rules you're following, you may be stuck in a situation where you do have to return funds. What I typically do is I try to accommodate with the loan fees sometimes as well. So sometimes if I have a small over award, I will review the Graduate Plus loan has a pretty hefty loan fee. It's like 4.25%. And some of our students are borrowing very large amounts of Graduate Plus loan. So sometimes a trick that I use, if it's a small over award, I will review the exact amount of Graduate Plus loan fee the student has been charged, and then I'll adjust the cost of attendance to match the exact amount of fees. And sometimes that will accommodate enough to make the over award go away. So that's a little trick that I do. That's kind of really, really detailed and particular, but remember, we're already accommodating for an average amount of loan fees, but if a student's borrowing above average, they may have a few $100s more of fees that they paid on that plus loan or the parent plus loan, and you can accommodate for those fees. And if that makes the difference, then that's good. But we just didn't adjust our cost of attendance when we adjusted our comprehensive fee to 0.
Yeah, Katrina commented on it, so I just wanted to read at Westchester, I believe, is WCU, we did a COVID-19 success credit that was added as an aid award rather than adjust all budgets. The COVID success credit created an over award, then we reduced unused work study first, then loans. So that was a good way to.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it. The way that we did our HERF money,
Mhm.
we kind of just put a false budget item on our cost of attendance. So for the HERF money, the CARES Act and the CRSA Act, and upcoming, we're about to give out the American Rescue Plan funds. Those weren't EFA. They're not financial aid, but most financial aid offices are the ones who process those funds. So we kind of had to trick our system into making it work, even though it wasn't financial aid. We still processed it like it was financial aid. And we just psyched our system out by increasing our cost of attendance by the exact amount of the HERF award that we gave. So we basically increased the COA for fake money, gave the CARES money, and then dispersed it and refunded it to the student. And they canceled each other directly out. So that's the way we did HERF with the CARES and the CRSA Act. Okay. All right. I don't know if any institutions take aid appeals. So that this would mean after a financial aid package has been sent out to a prospective, well, maybe not an accepted student or a returning student who's going to be enrolled. Does your institution, maybe quick in the chat, does your institution have an appeal process, which, you can allow a student or a student's family to appeal what was in that financial aid package? My guess is many will say yes.
Yes, there's a yes.
Yes. Okay.
And another yes.
Great. So, I mean, you do not have to take aid appeals of your financial aid packages. You should have a written and institutionally determined process. It should be part of your policies and procedures. It's very important that it be very well defined and explained in your policies and procedures, how you accept aid appeals, how you process aid appeals. And in my opinion, really, that should also be public information. So, I mean, I think probably you should have that on your financial aid webpage so that parents and students know how to do the process. And then, maybe the timeline of how long it takes for you to respond to an aid appeal. You may be having students who are just appealing based on no change to their FAFSA. Maybe the circumstances are not different than they were on the FAFSA, and you're not going to be doing a PJ. A PJ is professional judgment. So you may get an appeal that then prompts you to be like, oh, we need to do a PJ. We need to adjust what's on the FAFSA because it's not accurately depicting what the student's current financial situation is. Or the current financial situation may be exactly the same as it was on the FAFSA, but the student is appealing for some other reason, or just appealing because they're appealing. So I don't know what every institution is going to have their own determination of how this works. And as you respond to appeals, it'll depend on what you've done in response to the appeal to what aid can be changed. If you're changing the FAFSA and the EFC changes, then the student may become more eligible for federal aid. But if you're not changing the FAFSA and the student has appealed and you are just making an institutional determination, that this student should be eligible for a little bit more institutional aid based on their circumstances, then you would be awarding that additional aid and making adjustments if that caused an over award. It's probably not going to cause an over award. That's probably why they're appealing. But that could be that. And then the third thing could be the student could be actually appealing the cost of attendance itself. So this is what we deal with mostly in grad professional. When we accept appeals, it's typically not about what's on the FAFSA, because in general, graduate students have 0 EFCs because they're not working, they're students. So, and a lot of them are coming right from undergrad into a graduate program. So they've never worked, they've never had earned income. And once you're a graduate level student, you are independent for federal student aid. So you are not providing parent information on your FAFSA either. So most graduate students at PCOM have 0 EFCs. So what is there to appeal if your EFC is already 0? So we typically, well, we don't appeal FAFSA data at PCOM, but what we do appeal is the cost of attendance. So we may have a student who has a standard cost of attendance where we are assuming you are a single student living by yourself and you have X number of cost to live as a single student. But if you are married with children and you have a totally different cost of attendance for your kind of room and board component of your budget, we accept appeals in those situations. And then if that increases a student's cost of attendance, you're now increasing their financial need. So then you could award the student additional financial aid. And typically for us, that's loans. But go ahead, Melissa.
I was going to say, I think probably at the undergraduate level, we see a lot of appeals to aid. And a lot of that's going to really depend on what kind of institutional money that you have, because like you can't give them Pell if you're not Pell eligible, right? So like now some people will do income appeals, then you're all familiar with those. Then they may get different aid if they have an income appeal. But if they're just writing you saying, hey, I really want to come, but I need more money, most of those instances, unless you have a pot of institutional money, you may or may not be able to do anything. When you're looking at the income appeals, then you're looking at, you know, can you change the whole look of their package? So yeah, and each school has that right to decide if they want to accept appeals. You do not have to accept appeals. People may think you do, but you don't. Now, most enrollment management models are going to, because you want the student. So again, a lot of good information here, Grace. Thank you.
Yeah, and then our recent, some recent guidance that we do have to tell students about a PJ and that it's available. So that's a little complicated measure. I think that's going to come into play regarding the HERF3 funding. One of our requirements now is that we need to tell students that PJ is an option, and give them, I guess, instructions on how to pursue a professional judgment change to their aid eligibility if they're interested. So when I was writing my notes the other day for this, I circled optional and put a question mark. So I was like, I'm wondering if this is not going to be optional moving forward, or in the future, if Department of Ed may require schools to accept appeals.
Right. And Grace, Katrina is actually asking that right now about, you know, if you don't accept appeals, but they're asking due to COVID to notify the students they can do them, or PJs.
I don't know this 100%, but I would guess that they're going to make you do them for this period. But then when this period is over, then you would not have to continue to do PJs, because this guidance is specific to COVID. And so when COVID is no longer part of the issue, then they would not require that. But I believe in order to get the HERF money, you have to play the game.
Yes.
So you could say, well, we don't want to do appeals and we're not going to, and then you just wouldn't take the HERF money. So,
True.
you know, the department has ways of making us do things without making us do things. Do you know what I mean? So, and money is usually the quote incentive. So
Yeah.
that would be my guess on that. I don't think the guidance specifically states, but that would be my guess. Anybody have a different?
Yeah.
Janet, you seen anything?
No,
Laura?
no, that's my take on it as well. Is what
Yeah.
I would believe the timing of it.
Yeah, a lot of schools are then, I think the purpose of it is to incentivize schools to use the HERF-3 money for the appeals.
Yeah.
So the purpose is you should be telling students how to tell you that they're having financial hardship so that you can react to those particular cases with the HERF-3, because I think the intention is that's what the money's for. So I think that's what they're getting at, but I wouldn't be surprised if they say, good, you're all doing appeals now. You have to keep doing them if the student asks.
Yeah,
So,
we'll
because
see.
we know sometimes that happens.
Stay tuned.
Okay, so this is just I should have clicked forward earlier, but this is really, you know, oh no, this is about financial aid offers. Sorry, I got confused. So financial aid offers are the actual, the actual notification that's going out to the student when you are creating financial aid package for them. Your school can determine how you send out financial aid packages. I mean, you may be sending something out from the institution. If it is electronic, that's fine. But you should also be making sure that you are getting that authorization from the student to receive electronic communication from your institution. The way that we handle this is we do everything electronically. We'd send nothing in the mail to students. So when we create a financial aid package, we send that to the student via email. We guide them to their financial aid portal, into the student services banner, and they can view their financial aid award there. But before they get into their portal, for the first time each academic year, they have to affirm a couple things. And one of the things that they have to affirm is that they wish to communicate with our financial aid office electronically. And if they don't say yes to that, they can't look at the portal, because they're basically saying, I don't want to communicate with you electronically. Therefore, I'm not allowed to communicate with you electronically. So it's just like an affirmation of, yes, we will communicate with you electronically. And then a couple other authorizations that we do right before the student looks at their financial aid offer. We do the authorization for using federal funds, Title IV funds for non-institutional charges. There's a leeway there's a very small leeway for how much federal funds can be used for non-institutional charges, such as like health insurance or parking charges or things that are not directly in the cost of attendance.
Those are great ways to do that, Grace. Now, the only thing you have to be careful of, and again, I learned this from my standards of excellence, is when you do those kind of blasts to the students where they have to accept, you have to allow them to accept or reject. You can't have like a blanket, hey, this requirement, this requirement, this requirement, accept them all. You'd have to have this requirement, yes, no, this requirement, yes, no. So, but yeah, that's the way to do it nowadays. That's fabulous.
Yeah, that's exactly how we do it. It's 3 separate yes or no questions. And if they say no, then they're just kind of in limbo. And then they end up calling us or sending us an email electronically and saying, hey, I can't look at my financial aid package. And we say, yeah, that's because you said no to doing things electronically. And then we override it typically. I don't think I've ever sent a paper financial aid package to a student because they have said no and refused to look at it in the portal. So that's one way to do that. So that's how we do it. I'm sure other institutions are sending out paper financial aid packages. You can also, just have the student view what they're eligible for just from the FAFSA. The FAFSA does generally tell students what they're eligible for federal student aid. But yeah, so, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't issue a financial aid offer, but you don't have to, but I don't really know why you wouldn't. because you do want students to know that they can pay for your school if they're coming, and you kind of want them to come. So I'm not really sure why you wouldn't do that. In the financial aid notification, you need to have lots of information, very particular things. So you have to have obviously the amounts. You have to show the student how the aid is being dispersed, how it's being kind of separated over the cost of attendance for the academic year. You have to have a certain consumer information in there and their terms and conditions for the aid. What we do is we then say we put on all gift aid as accepted. We just assume the student's going to accept their scholarships. But then we obviously don't put the loans on. Loans or work study are offered aid. And then the student has to accept it in the financial aid portal in order for us to continue to move forward with creating those pieces of financial aid for them. So these are just some of the things that should be in your financial aid offer. You should be telling the student what the cost is, giving them their EFC, their financial need, their unmet need. All those figures should be in there, and information about aid disbursements, timing of those disbursements, and stuff like that. Like I said, can be electronic, can be on paper. You can have the student accepting or rejecting the aid when they receive the aid offer. And it should be, they say it should be sent well in advance of enrollment. Our particular school sometimes doesn't send it well in advance of enrollment, because if a student doesn't file their FAFSA until later or doesn't become a confirmed student until a day before class starts, that's when they're getting their aid package. So maybe we should look at that, but that's what we do. Okay, we're almost done. So I've got just a couple of questions to maybe do some discussion instead of chat. Do any schools, I guess in the chat you could say, do any schools here meet full financial need, even just in general, for some students or for any students? I can actually maybe view the chat.
Yes, James, you guys cover 100% need, huh?
Yep, Jasper said yes, 100%.
Wow, that's great. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, for some students. Interesting.
Awesome. So I'm assuming those institutions, are you guys using an institutional methodology for your EFC, or are you using the federal methodology?
You'd almost have to be using an institutional.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We do for most zero EFC students with the highest admissions GPA calc. Jasper both and CSS, federal and CSS.
Yep.
Both. Yep.
Wow, great. A long time ago, when I first started doing financial aid, I attended College Board institution, and we did IM EFC calculations by hand, like on a worksheet, and it was very intense.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you something. It's really interesting to do an EFC calc. I know it's, and I'm not even just like a major math like nerd or anything, but although I do like math, it's just interesting to go through the categories and see how they allocate. You know, New York state tax, they have an allowance for that. They have an allowance for the age of the older parent for retirement savings. So although the calculation is very overwhelming to think about doing, I would encourage each of you to go out, take a peek at it, because it just really does make you think. And even to do one, you do one for yourself, maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it is really interesting how the calculation works and what affects different things. So that's all I'll put on that one. But yeah,
I agree,
really
Melissa.
interesting
It is helpful. It's really good just to give you a little bit of background knowledge on what does that EFC actually mean. And yeah, eventually, like Janet was saying yesterday, it's not going to be called EFC anymore. We're going to be calling it the Financial Aid Index. So that's helpful. I think that maybe is more clear. I don't know. It's very hard But I do think expected family contribution has a certain connotation that then frustrates students and parents because they think, okay, well, I'm expected to pay $28,000 and you're charging me 40. I should be paying less. Or how am I expected to pay $80,000 a year for tuition when I only make $250,000 a year, like stuff like that. So we get that from our med students often. So great. Let's see, I don't want to take us all the way to the end of the time. So I think that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions or anything? That was a very general overview of the types of considerations to take when packaging. I do really highly recommend that you go and speak with your supervisor or your director and kind of get a conversation going about what's your packaging methodology at your institution and what are your institutional goals. I think that that's something that would hopefully be impressive that you're thinking about those things, but it also really helps you understand like the big picture, which sometimes in financial aid, you lose sight of the big picture because you're in the minutia of every day and processing and things. So keeping that big picture in mind is, I think, helpful. Yeah, so any questions? I can see chat now, so.
Okay, no, you did a good job. All right, if you want to stop the recording.
Sure, I will
And
stop the
then
recording.